Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Lion, the Way, and the War, where we discuss Jesus, his church, and the spiritual battle that surrounds us all. My name is Craig Allison, and I will be your host. All right, joining me on today's episode is Brandon Bonner. Now, he doesn't know I'm gonna do this. This is a blast from the past. You were the fourth episode on our very first season, and I pulled that introduction, that bio, and here's what I had to say. Joining me today is Brandon Bonner, and I'm excited to talk to him because he's still part of the Christian Student Center after spending the last several years as one of our student ambassadors, but will be graduating in a few weeks. He has a job lined up at the TVA, and he's about to get married in a few days.
Is that really your intro?
That was really my intro. Yeah. And so now here we are 4 years later, and you're homeless. You don't have a job at the TV, and your wife left you.
That's right. I live in your basement.
No, so I don't know why I said that. So you got a job, and you've worked your way up, working with TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority. For those that don't know what that means, you did get married.
I did.
You went through with it.
I did.
She did not run.
She didn't.
We thought she was going to.
And married 3 times.
You haven't. Yeah, that's right. 3 times been married.
Same person.
Same person.
Never divorced.
Yeah. And let's see. I did all 3 weddings, didn't I?
You did.
Yeah.
You did. One in your living room or driveway.
Yep. And for everybody's like listening, going, "Wait, what? How? Why did you do that?" So one was the official ceremony.
Yep.
And that was you couldn't have a lot of people there because that was the COVID, right?
It was during COVID, and Hamilton County wouldn't issue us a marriage license because we didn't live in Hamilton County.
That's right.
But we had a venue there, so they let us have like a small, 10 or less ceremony.
Yep. And that's you had planned for something much larger than that.
We did, yeah. So we had to. That was the 3rd wedding. We had, all the people we invited, the catering that we paid for, and everything was on August.
Yeah. So. And then we did a really brief ceremony at my house in Georgia.
We did. That was the legal
to
one.
make it legal.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's a strange times.
It was.
Yeah.
It's a good fun fact, though. Married 3 times, never divorced.
It is, because every time you said that, you're like, wait, what? And so your job's going good at TVA. I've enjoyed watching you work your way up and get more and more responsibility. And you bought a house since this time, and now the next step is, I guess, kids, right? That's the logical.
Yes, yeah, some point. Okay. Not sure when, but Lexi, my wife, she's a teacher, so she has 20 plus kids. 10 months out of the year. So we're not in a rush, but definitely in our future.
Yeah. Any real surprises about marriage? I mean, is it everything you thought, or are you really surprised by some things?
I don't know if I'm super surprised, but it's a lot of work. That's probably one of the biggest things. You hear that a lot. And of course, we didn't have the best examples of marriage growing up. It wasn't until later in life that we saw some good Christian foundational centered marriages. And so I think it requires a lot of work spiritually, mentally, physically. You have to continue to contribute to that marriage.
Yeah. We talked that first episode that I had you on, the 4th episode, the first time I had you on the podcast. We really centered around the Christian Student Center, what it meant in your life, how it had impacted you, and that kind of stuff. We're not going to do that today, though. We're talking about your generation, which is why I wanted to have you on the podcast, because since that time, the church at large has gone through this transitional phase with the pandemic, and a lot of people have been interested to track the statistics, and it's your generation that's causing a lot of alarm and getting a lot of focus and a lot of attention. So all of my children are from Generation Z, which Generation Z are kids born between 1997 and 2012. So basically the age range for Generation Z is, if my math real quickly, like around 12 years old to 26 years old, something like that. And so here's the alarming thing. This younger generation, there's 1.2, 1.4, some statistics say around 1 million. So, but it's 1 million or more that are leaving the church every year. So obviously that's a really huge concern. This is a study here that I pulled by Pinetops Foundation and 10x10. Both pretty large. These were large sample studies. And they're saying that this mass exodus, which will most likely include Generation Alpha, so that's the one just below Generation Z, that there will be 35 million people disaffiliating with the church by 2050. And that is, I think, cause for contemplation. I was going to say alarm, but I don't want to, I don't want to be like an alarmist. But I think when we're looking at this and tracking the numbers and seeing some of the trending, there's definitely cause for concern.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. And so you're part of this generation, which is why I was really interested in talking to you today and just kind of picking your brain about why you think there's such a disinterest going on in your generation and your age population not really being interested in organized religion, going to church. Sure. So I'm going to stop talking for a second and just kind of let you navigate your response to that.
Yeah. Well, first thing, visiting, I want to go back to marriage. I didn't say that it's great. It is. It's fantastic. Lexi, I know you're going to watch this. I love you. Marriage is a blast. So I want to put that out there because I just said it was required a lot of work, but it is a fantastic thing. Thinking about my generation, I think I'm a little bit unique because I didn't grow up in the church. Mm-hmm. My parents didn't go to church. My grandparents didn't really go to church either. So this was all new and different. I think where we have failed as a church and as Christians is we haven't created an attractive community for people to come into and want to be a part of. Mm-hmm. And so, when I think about what has attracted me to church and wanting to initially start coming to some of these events, meeting your family and start studying the Word, it was the people that were around me, this community of people that, cared about me as an individual enough to share, hey, this is important. This is salvation, and this is how you can obtain salvation. This is an incredible gift that God's given you. And if you don't have that attractive community, then why would I want to be a part of it?
Yeah. And I think church leaders are vastly interested in understanding and knowing what are we doing wrong here? Where are we missing the mark? What do we need to be saying? What do we need to be doing specifically to this upcoming generation, because you guys are now entering into adulthood. It's from your demographic that really the future of the church kind of gets traction and hopefully turns a corner. And if your generation is walking away from that, then what happens? And what's you mentioned this a little bit ago, like this split, a divide even amongst your generation. Sure. And some of that bleeds into Generation Alpha, which is even a more or as much a risk, I think, for leaving and having just a different mindset. So what's going on with that?
Well, I do think there is a slight divide between Generation Z. It seems like there's some pre-COVID and post-COVID differences between the generation. And I don't know, that I haven't pulled any studies or research, just from what I've observed. Uh-huh. Some of my peers that are younger but have experienced life differently, like during COVID, whereas we were senior year of college, we'd already gone through high school and had a lot of social experience. Some of these people were growing up like missing huge social experiences because of COVID. So I think the first thing that we have to think about is the way that we interact socially is vastly different. A lot of people grew up in a virtual world, going to class, going to school, working virtually. All those things, I think, has an impact on what community looks like.
Yeah.
Talking to a few of my peers that really want to have in-person connection, I think that's one thing that we have to do is think about, as a church, we need to be in person, but it's not just 1 or 2 days a week. This has to be something that's dynamic, something that, we come together on a regular basis, not just to have a worship service, but to build true in-person relationships, connections, centered around, discovering Jesus and what his church is supposed to look like.
Yeah. And that is definitely something that I think the pandemic, it did impact that a lot, especially those who were, a little bit younger, 4 or 5 years younger than you were, and their whole high school experience and then into college was vastly different than yours, even though you're in that same generation. And I'm curious to know how that, like your observations, how that has translated into the work environment. Like what's the difference there?
Yeah, so, one of the things that I do at TVA is I help support and run our financial services internship program. So we see a lot of students that come through, and I think that there's some, trying to think how to phrase this. I think that there's some big differences in terms of social experience, what's appropriate and when is it appropriate to say, and even the relationships with like leadership and higher level employees, like how do you treat those individuals? Because I think there's been a sense of informality that came with COVID and being in a virtual environment. And I think some of that's good for the corporate culture. Yeah. It kind of eliminates this, leader that's over you and they're not approachable. I think some of those barriers have been broken down, which is good. But I think the social experience isn't there to understand that sometimes acting this way or saying these things or presenting this way is probably not appropriate for this audience. That makes sense.
It does. And I think just to drill down on this a little bit more, so your generation, Generation Z, is the first generation who are technology natives. You were born into it. You haven't known anything differently. And then as we look into that a little bit deeper, we do see that the pandemic caused a greater emphasis on virtual connections. And then there is a divide between the pre-COVID folks and then the post-COVID that bleeds into Generation Alpha. And so there's studies now showing that from the post-pandemic into Generation Alpha, over 85% of those young people have what is classified as technology addictions. So it's, X amount of hours per day. And so that's kind of like what we're looking at here from a sociological view. And obviously that is impacting the way people process information, the way they process relationships. And from a church perspective, what do we do with that? Like, how is that navigated to where we can get across to these technology natives, okay, which does include you, but maybe not to the same extent, that in-person dynamics is something that is a good thing and not something to run away from?
So a couple of things there. I think first off, social media and technology can be a very difficult challenge to overcome. Mm-hmm. I caught myself when TikTok came out, which was kind of around the time of COVID, just super easy. I think it's designed to be addictive. Like you scrolling and there's, endorphins that are released because you're continually getting new content. Attention span, struggled. So I had to remove myself from that. I set up screen time and even then on my phone, it wasn't enough. So I just completely deleted the social, that social media platform. And thinking about it, probably should delete the rest of them, to be honest, because they're all similar in the way that they can kind of attract you in. In terms of, from the church standpoint, I think that historically there has been, conversation that social media is bad and evil and we should just steer away from it completely. And I don't think that's the right answer, because we have to realize that this audience is on social media. They're engrossed in technology. So how can we leverage technology to grab their attention, and kind of do a hybrid of this, virtual learning and in connection, and also doing in-person community. I think once you can start to figure out what that looks like, and I think we've done that at Central. I mean, we have, a lot of social media out there, and we've seen growth from that social media. We've seen some of our events just explode.
Yeah.
So I think we need to leverage those technologies. I mean, we're doing it right here, a podcast.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so I want to share some. This is the Barna research, and they really massive study. They're listed 7 biggest reasons why Generation Z is bailing on Christianity. So I want to go through these and just kind of get a feel for if this is something that maybe not applicable to you or resonates with you, but you have a larger group of people that that are in your like your peer group and your influence and work groups and all of that kind of stuff. If any of this is making sense or resonates with you. So 29% say that they have a hard time believing that a good God would allow so much evil or suffering in the world. So that's not a new statement. I mean, that's an age-old thing, but it's usually tied into whether or not God is real. How could, if God is real and he's supposed to be all good, then how can he allow evil stuff to happen? So, one of those fundamental questions that is it's a pretty old question. I mean, that was going around when I was a young person. But here it is popping up within Generation Z, and it looks like almost 30% of them, they struggle with that. So what's happening there?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think a couple things. First off, we have more access to media and news than we've ever had before in our lives. So some of those evil things and the bad things, they typically pop up to the front, and that grabs a lot of attention, and depending on your algorithm, you can just be engrossed in this negative kind of media, whether it be violence or political news or world unrest, whatever it might be. So I think that's a piece of it. And the second piece is, I think it's important for us to acknowledge that evil does exist, but that doesn't mean that God isn't real. And in fact, if anything, it kind of supports the biblical narrative that there's evil enemy forces that are fighting against all of us, and that's a battle that we have to face each and every day.
So maybe, I mean, are we not pushing back and responding as a church needs to that question, because they're inundated with it, as you said, and I wasn't really necessarily thinking about it in terms of it being that's tied in. Why the reason that's resurfacing is it's tied into technology, algorithms. People start looking that kind of stuff up, and they get the quick, easy answer that's usually convoluted or biased or whatever, and they run with that without digging any deeper. They're just like, oh, there it is on my TikTok feed, it must be true, and they're never challenged on that thinking. So right. I'm just wondering out loud now, is that something that the church has dropped the ball on, and we're not responding to that kind of stuff? And maybe not purposely, but my age group, older, the church leaders today don't even realize that that's getting spoon-fed to your generation.
Sure.
Every hour of every day, conviction by repetition kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that we definitely need to, as a church, focus on not steer away from the evil, but also focus on, this is an incredible thing. It's an incredible gift. There's a lot of joy and good things that are going on in this world. Social media can definitely put up a front that everything's bad, everything's going to doom. So I think that's definitely a struggle point for my generation, especially when you think about the other impacts that social media has caused with anxiety and depression and some of those other things. I mean, you're just hammered with negative things. There is good things on social media. You can watch a ton of biblical or life advice podcast videos, accounts, whatever it might be, but there definitely is a lot of things that can be negative.
Okay. So the second reason, and this was one that did not shock me at all, 23% of Generation Z cite the reason that they're bailing on Christianity is because Christians are hypocrites.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's something I experienced. I was a non-believer before really before I met your son, Harrison, which, he invited me to a musical that we were having at school, and actually we never really sat down and studied together, but there were people that, he introduced me to, and of course, they were discipling to me. But I think it's such a bad thing for us to put up this front that we're perfect and that, that we're not going to make mistakes and we're not going to sin. But it's also important for us to be very genuine. Yeah. And that's some gaps I've seen. I did youth ministry for a little while, and hearing some of the things I heard there, and of course at the Student Center, college ministry, and talking to students, they have seen their parents or other people in their lives that are just these, spiritual statues in their lives. They could do no wrong. And as they've gotten older, they start to see that there's some flaws, and then you can just go down this hill of, well, I mean, if my parents are this way, or is this faith real? Is this something that, I should contribute time to and effort into? And so, as Christians, we have failed to be genuine with people. We want to appear perfect, and we know that that's not the case.
And there's something really interesting about the Generation Z, to some extent, the millennials, to some extent, to a large extent, the millennials, definitely Generation Z, and I think Generation Alpha is being primed right now to be cynical because of technology. They look at everything with kind of a skeptic's eye, which underscores the need for church leaders, church members, to not do the same thing that they've been doing as far as, presenting this front of, holiness and perfection. And I mean, I've seen that. It's not here at Central,
sure,
but I know of congregations right now who say if you are, I just so legalistic, right? And they will basically say you're going to hell, and they're preaching this fire brimstone. And I'm not knocking or arguing, teaching doctrine and not running from the truth of Scripture, right? But to this point where it's just so legalistic to the point, and then the kids look at that and they see them doing things that don't look like Scripture at all. Then that critic's eye comes out, what they've been exposed to in social media, and just having a kind of a cynicism about them leads them completely open to looking at us and going, you've been judged and you've found lacking. I don't want to have anything to do with that.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that, another thing is Christians can have the tendency to turn very negative very quickly on issues they feel very passionate about, thinking politically, that typically is a point of contention.
Yeah.
And that can really cause some issues for my generation. You have on one side of the house saying, we're supposed to be loving and approach people with grace and extend grace and mercy and all those things. And then on the other side, you have, someone going on some sort of rant on social media that doesn't show anything except hate. So I think we have to be aware and careful on how we present ourselves on whatever issue it might be, to approach it in a way that is Christ-like. You think about, how did Jesus approach those that were caught in sin in the New Testament?
Yeah.
With love and grace. He didn't say it's okay to do it, but he did say, you're forgiven, go and sin no more. Yeah. And so that should be the same response from us.
Yeah, and I think like my generation and maybe the generation above me, so baby boomers and Generation X, I've seen us getting better at that, not being afraid to say, hey, we don't have all the answers. We're broken. We're sinful. And you're saying that needs to be emphasized more, that we need to not be afraid of that at all, because to present something different than that has a different feel, a different impact on the technology-savvy generations than what it would have had on mine. I mean, because I kind of knew, as I was growing up, I knew people were hypocrites. But I wasn't I wasn't inundated with cynicism. Why am I struggling with that word? Cynical is the word I'm trying to say. I wasn't inundated with like the cynical stuff across my social media feed all the time and just like having that. So when I looked at the older generations and I saw the hypocrisy, I was like, well, sure. I mean, everybody's kind of a hypocrite, and it didn't wreck me.
Right.
That just is not. It's not that is not carried over, right? And I mean, I've heard this as a campus minister over and over. The Generation Z, y'all's age group, is really hungry for authentic spirituality, authentic Christianity.
Yep. And I think that's one of the biggest differences is we can't steer away from hard questions or hard situations. You know, you did a class a couple years ago on kind of moral dilemmas. Some of these things are really tough to navigate as a Christian and how to handle these certain situations. And so when we're approaching, Generation Z, we have to be aware that this generation is hungry for things that are genuine, authentic, and real. But also, this is a generation that's going to want a deep answer.
Yeah.
A surface answer is not going to solve it. They're going to want to do some research. They're going to want to study and go deeper. And so as Christians, we have to be prepared, A, to go deep with them, and B, if we don't have the answers, to be genuine enough to say, hey, this is something we need to figure out together.
Also recognized in your generation and the millennials coming through that you really were looking for ways to put faith and spirituality to give those to give feet to that. The application piece of that was really important to y'all's generation, and maybe not so much as mine. I mean, like we could be more theoretical about it, but applying that faith, applying those things maybe didn't resonate as much with us. So why do you think that is with your generation?
I think it ties into, we want to be authentic. And when you read the Bible, especially the first century Christians, they had a lot of struggles and a lot of shortcomings, but nonetheless, they took action and they did things with their faith. It wasn't just hey, I go to church on Sunday, I go to church on Wednesday. I might occasionally invite someone to come with me, but that's kind of the extent. And that's not what you see in the scriptures. Yeah. You see a much more organic and dynamic group of Christians that came together. They ate together. They shared life with each other. They shared burdens and victories. Yeah. And so when you have, my generation, we read the scriptures, and then we look at the typical church in America, it's completely different. Yeah. It's not aligned in any way. And I think that's where you kind of get into, well, I'm spiritual, but I don't go to church.
Yeah. So here's something that I'm struggling with, because, and you've heard this said before, this is the most connected generation yet disconnected, with technology. And what you're saying here is that your generation is hungry for this relational dynamic, where it's more you are connected physically, not through media, not through technology, but you guys are coming together. But there's this like reticence, there's this hesitation because of the uncomfortableness of being in groups with people, because you're just not used to that. So it's kind of a contrast, right?
Yep.
How is that overcome? Like, how do we pull those that want that, but they're shy or they're out of their comfort zone, to get plugged into church groups, small groups, whatever it may be? So they want it, they need it, but it's getting them there is going to be a problem.
Yep. Yeah, that's a great question. And it's not something that I think we're just seeing at the church level. We're seeing it at work too. I mean, you have this group that you have a lot of people say, I'd like to be in person. I like to connect in person. And then you have something and no one shows up.
Yeah.
So I think you have similar issues here. As far as the answer, I'm not entirely sure. I think that flexibility is important for a lot of people. And I think that you have to start maybe on an individual relationship basis. So, and what I mean by that is, let's say I want you to come to church with me. I'm going to have to build that relationship and that level of trust between you and I. Mm-hmm. And then I can slowly begin maybe introducing you to like a small group or, a group of people that meet and get together. Me inviting you to church and us not having that trust established isn't going to be effective for you to come. You're not going to feel comfortable. You're not going to know anyone there. And then also, you're used to meeting people for the first time, a lot of times social or virtually. You're not, used to that in-person meeting.
That's an interesting thing to talk about as I'm processing what you're saying, because for the current church leaders, for my generation, the generation above us, that just it doesn't compute. We were like, what? There's 50 people getting together tonight? Yeah, let's go. We were all about, and because we didn't have the technology, we didn't have that separation that has been sort of, pushed into our psyche, our collective psyche today. So we were all about getting together, seeing people, being part of a crowd, and just, enjoying company and all of that kind of stuff. So to look at the younger generations and they're scared to death to do that, we just don't understand it. We don't get it. So I think the link there is for us to understand that it's not Generation Z's fault that they're like that. It is directly related, I think, to what's been set up within technology. It's allowed that to happen, and it's literally changed the way people relate to one another. And obviously that bleeds into the stuff we're talking about here, which makes it difficult.
Yep.
So, all right. The one of the other reasons here is that there are too many injustices in the history of Christianity. So 15% of Generation Z have a problem with the injustices in the history of Christianity. Is that something that is related to this idea of like social justice, which is such a huge thing that's pushed today?
I think that might be a piece of it. I think probably the deeper part of it is, again, being authentic and genuine. And so how many times have we steered away from difficult questions about maybe some of the injustices that have been a result or even in the Bible? You read about God that caused some turmoil in the Old Testament. And so how do you reason and rationale that's conversations and discussions that we should be having, but they're difficult. They're tough for us to have, but we should have them. They're important.
Yeah. And so the teachers of today's world or in the church have shied away from those difficult questions to the detriment of the younger generations.
Absolutely.
And we can't do that. I mean, we can't be scared of tackling those, because what does that leave Generation Z wondering if they don't have the answer to their question? Even if it's an answer that you don't want to give or that's tough to deal with, I think it does play back into that. I can't trust this person. They're not being authentic with me. They're fake. Why do I want to have anything to do with that? So it's all rolled in together there. Yeah.
I think so.
All right. So another one is, I used to go to church, but it's just not important to me anymore. 12%. And kind of related to that, at number 7, I had a bad experience in church or with a Christian, 6%. So 18, that's almost 20% right there. Those two reasons. They don't feel like church is important, and they've had a bad experience in the past with church or with a Christian. Thoughts about those two issues?
Yeah, I think a couple things is, church probably wasn't super important in their home life. And what I mean by that is it's easy for us to attend church and that's it. Be participants, not even participants, consumers of church. Come here on Sunday, hear a sermon, worship, sing some songs, have a couple prayers, break bread, and that's it. Yeah. And that's the last time we talk about anything Christian until next Sunday or the following Wednesday or whatever it is. And so I think that it's important for us to be involved, and for my generation as we have kids, because some of the generations starting to have kids, we have to be involved parents, and we have to make sure that as a family unit that we're involved in church past a Sunday or a Wednesday service. It has to look like, it can look like different things. Maybe it's community service, maybe it's getting out there, maybe it's discipling to those around us, maybe it's getting other people in the congregation together just to fellowship and build relationships. So we have to have to be connected and make sure that we're not just doing this once or twice a week. It doesn't work.
What are effective ways that you see the church being able to respond to that very thing?
We're so protective of our time, and understandably so. A lot of us may have families and kids, and those are huge time commitments. A lot of us have jobs, and those are huge time commitments. So our time is very precious to us, and I think that's probably kind of an American societal concept, because when we've been to other countries, mission trips, time is way less valuable to them. Relationships kind of are a priority over that. So we have to somehow figure out, how do we make this cultural shift to help people understand that, yes, your time's important, but also relationships with each other, the kingdom, relationship with God and Christ is more important than your time.
And that, I think, has to start at home. I don't think that they're going to pick that up some other place.
Right.
I think it's mom and dads that have got to be teaching that. And so your generation is a product of my generation. I'm the age of the parents that have produced your age group. And so when I do self-analyzing, my generation, it's kind of on us that we didn't do that, because we're the latchkey kids. We came home. It was mom and dad were now both having to work to make ends meet, so we were basically on our own. And I think for a large portion of my age demographic, we didn't get that idea of being the parental figure, because we didn't see it. We were kind of left unattended, and I wasn't personally, but I know a lot of my friends growing up, the parent, where were they? And so it was like, hey, my parents aren't here. Everybody come over to my house. And we just, we went kind of wild and crazy, and there was no foundational cornerstone laid to set an example of what it looked like. And so now I don't think it's any surprise that we have a generation who are not getting that teaching at home. They didn't get it. It's just not there.
Yeah, and I think about your situation. You and your wife both worked and raised kids, right?
Yes.
Pretty much their entire life.
Yeah. And
so what's one of the biggest differences? Well, you were a campus minister, so maybe your kids were forced to be
absolutely
involved.
Yeah.
And so, when I came along, junior year of high school, Harrison and I were always at the student center.
Yeah.
And so seeing people involved and connected on that level was probably one of the most attractive things to start to go on this journey of what is a Christian, what is it like to be a Christian, why should I want to be a Christian? Because I see this group of people that are meeting together, that are sacrificing time to build relationships, that are eating together, which I think is a very important piece. I think we've gotten away from the family table. Yeah. I didn't really grow up with that either, but that's one thing I noticed about your family is a lot of times we still do every Sunday. Yeah. We get around the table and we eat together. And there's a lot of things that are shared and a lot of connection made in those settings.
And what's interesting to me, because you kind of alluded to the fact that we need to make time. Like, it's not convenient,
right?
But what's interesting to me is to see we've got folks driving to my house. They're not just next door; they're driving a distance to get there. So I mean, it's a need for people to have that relational connectivity, and I think one of the biggest takeaways for the church today, which church leaders ask me, they're like, what do we need to be doing to reach your generation, to keep you guys in church, to keep you from walking away from the church? This is one of the big things that I've noticed over the years is that we've got to make our homes available. We've got to be relational. We've got to, and even if you just have one person show up, don't stop. Just keep doing it. Keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it. And eventually you're going to have more and more people, because that one person is going to be, wow, this is transformational. I didn't know that I craved this so much, but we're built that way. God designed us to be relational. And he's going to tell a person, and then the next thing you know, and all of a sudden now you've got 20 or 30 people that are connecting with each other and seeing deeper things and being okay with digging into their faith and their spirituality and asking the questions and trusting somebody who may be older, like me, to deal with those hard questions, even though I may not like the answer either. It's like, hey, this is the way it is. We still love you. God still loves you. But, these are one of those things that we have to wrestle with.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah, I mean, hosting, having people in your home, and being invited into someone's home, I mean, that's an extremely powerful tool and resource that we don't use. I mean, a lot of us have, hopefully, some place to live. I've been to events in apartments, 1-bedroom apartment, super tiny, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So having people in your home and opening your home and, feeding them or not feeding them, whatever, but that is super impactful, especially for someone that is just figuring out what does this Christian life look like.
Yeah. Good stuff. Listen, I'm appreciative of you taking the time and letting me kind of pick your brain on this. I think Central Church of Christ here, we're doing some classes on this and looking at this pretty deeply. As a matter of fact, next Wednesday we're going to have a question-answer session for those that are listening and want to come to that. I'm going to be kind of put on the hot seat, and we're going to have somebody be asking me questions about Generation Z specifically and some of these things that you and I have talked about. So this was kind of prep work just to kind of get my mental gears kind of greased up a little bit and thinking back in terms of this. You've got a passage of Scripture that I think that you're going to read?
Yeah, so you asked me for a favorite Scripture, and I have a few, but this one's kind of been sticking out to me for a couple reasons. I'll go and read it. So it's Philippians 2, verse 3, "Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves." I think that's probably one of the most challenging things, and it ties into a lot of the points that we talked about today. Sacrificing time, putting in effort so that others can be counted more significant than yourself, all with the goal that you're sharing Jesus with them, and Jesus is incredible, right? He's all loving, and he's given us a incredible gift of salvation, and we need to make sure that people are aware of his love for us and what he's done for us.
Yeah, good stuff. Absolutely. Our YouTube channel is back up. It was briefly taken down, but we've got that back up. So if you're watching on YouTube and you haven't subscribed to the channel, go ahead and click the subscribe button and like it, share it with other people. If you've got an idea, if there's something that you would like us to discuss on this podcast, you can email us at thelionthewayandthewar@gmail.com. We'd be happy to discuss any of the questions or topics that you would like to hear about. So I'm always looking for that. I'm looking for feedback from folks that listen to the podcast and hear. And I sometimes I get a few, they pop in sporadically. I would really love to hear back from folks. We're in season 3 now, and I'd like to get some ideas as we approach season 4. So we're wrapping up season 3 here pretty quickly. And then we're going to take a brief hiatus and do some studio work and get things fixed up a little bit and some changes made. But then as we kick off into season 4, I've got some recurring guests that I want to have back, because that has been a request, the mental health issues and talking a little bit more about that, some financial stuff from a biblical perspective. I think we're going to talk more about that. And then also, if you would like to be a sponsor of this show, it obviously takes time and effort and money and energy to get all of this stuff up and running and going. And so I'm happy to plug folks out there, good organizations or people that you just have whatever whatever sponsorship level that you would like to go, and we can talk about that. And speaking of that, Ministry League, the app there is on the screen. You can see that. They are one of our sponsors. Great app to have as a resource, as I often say. So consider all of those things. And until our next podcast of The Lion, the Way, and the War, love one another, be kind to one another, and remember, the Creator of the universe loves you so much that he gave up his only Son for you. Have a blessed day.